Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Mosley. I'm the Volunteer Services Manager at the Hospice of the Chesapeake. Today, as part of our celebration for Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day, I have the pleasure of interviewing two very special guests. John Astle is a former senator and delegate from the state of Maryland. He's a retired Marine Corps Reserve Colonel. He won 2 Purple Hearts and many air medals for his service in Vietnam. And also George Forrest, who's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and former Chief Administrator for St. Mary's County. John retired from the Marine Corps Reserve after 30 years of service. He earned 34 air medals and 2 Purple Hearts for his service in Vietnam. And George retired from the Army after 21 years of service, earned a Silver Star for heroism, 2 Bronze Stars for valor, and the Combat Infantryman Badge. So good morning and welcome to both of you, and thanks for being with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the invite.
You're welcome. So before we speak with each of them on their experience and honor all those who served during the Vietnam War, I'd like to share with you why the Hospice of the Chesapeake believes so passionately in providing unique service to our veteran patients throughout the communities that we serve in Anne Arundel, Prince George's, and Charles County. In early 2011, the hospice joined the We Honor Veterans movement, given that close to 25% of our patients at any given time are veterans of military service. Our mission is to serve veterans through the challenges that they may be facing from illness, isolation, or traumatic life experience. These unique experiences significantly impact them as they live with a serious illness and experience the end of life. Equally as important is the unique family experience and how that defines the grieving process. By recognizing the unique needs of Americans, veterans, and their families, we believe we can learn how to accompany and guide our veteran patients through their life stories towards a more peaceful ending through grateful acknowledgement, respectful inquiry, and compassionate listening. So in 2015, this led us to Senator John Astle, who passionately helped us establish legislation that created Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day in the state of Maryland on March 30th of each year to commemorate the sacrifices of the Vietnam veterans. This led to Governor Larry Hogan signing his first piece of legislation as governor, officially marking March 30th as Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day annually in the state of Maryland. Prior to the COVID pandemic, we were able to host several in-person events, gratefully acknowledging hundreds of Vietnam veterans. And now, unfortunately, we're going to have to do this virtually this year. Hopefully next year we'll be back to live. So we're now going to hear from each of our guests on their experience and what this day means to them. So George and John, how about a little insight into how you two actually met?
George, why don't you tell that story?
Well, at one point I was at a social gathering, and in my inimitable style, I was telling Marine Corps jokes, and John's wife was in the crowd and went back and told John that there's a guy over there who's telling Marine Corps jokes. And John's response was, and I'll exclude the expletives, that why would I want to go hear somebody telling Marine Corps jokes? And that's how we met.
That's a real good one. I'd like to hear that story in more detail. John, you've been a longtime supporter of the hospice, which we greatly appreciate. Can you describe how your relationship with the organization helped inform your efforts on behalf of Vietnam veterans, particularly with regards to the introduction of the bill that established Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day?
I'd been associated with hospice since it got started in Anne Arundel County. I was in the legislature for 36 years total, so there were a lot of things that got started while I was there. But during the latter period, I was approached by one of the people in hospice who asked me if I would come to a couple of those honoring ceremonies that took place in your organization. And I did. And I was impressed with what it meant to those individuals who were looking at the end of life. So, taking my own experience, coming home from Vietnam to a country that really held no respect for us, any of us, and I think George probably experienced the same thing as well. This was an opportunity to put a spotlight on the fact that we did some good things. It's often said we weren't the greatest generation, but we were the greatest of our generation. I happened to be at the time the only Vietnam veteran in the Senate of Maryland. And I was asked if I would author legislation that would create Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day. And I was really pleased and happy to do that. Once I got the bill drafted and introduced, every member of the Senate wanted to be a co-sponsor. And then the House found out that we had a bill in the Senate and they wanted a bill in the House, and every member of the House signed on. So it was a clear indication that at least in the legislative bodies, people recognized those of us who served in Vietnam and what we had accomplished. And so I was proud to put the bill in. As you said, the governor signed it. It was kind of out of the ordinary. Normally, bills don't get signed until June, but the governor signed this bill the very day that it was enacted. And then we had the first Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans event. So that's kind of the story.
Great. That's great. So you mentioned a little bit about your experience when you returned from Vietnam and how you weren't welcomed back for the most part. Did that contribute to you sponsoring this bill as well? Those exact experiences where you weren't welcomed back and wanted to do something on that behalf.
Well, I just wanted by that bill to make sure that Vietnam veterans were recognized by the society of today. It's true. I experienced it. I'm sure George did as well. But I was going to the Los Angeles airport to get a flight back to the East Coast, and a woman spit on me in the concourse of the airport. That was the kind of response that we got. Some guys were told not to wear their uniforms, just come home in civilian clothes. So it was a difficult time.
Right. George, what did it mean to you personally that your friend helped enact this bill? And now that we have a day that recognizes your service in Vietnam as well?
Well, John has been the drum major in leading the challenge that a lot of guys are still wrestling with as a result of their experience in Vietnam. And I am just so fortunate that John has befriended me and has invited me to participate in the legislation. In fact, I was invited to the signing by John. But you know, Bob, in hindsight, Vietnam had some advantages for us because the result of the way John and I and my fellow veterans were treated woke America up to the fact that they needed to appreciate the service, because it was not the soldiers. We were just doing what we were told and believed was the correct thing to do. And so now today, every veteran that you see will be welcomed by Welcome Home. I mean, before this legislation, this was, I used to remember that people would turn their heads if they saw a Vietnam veteran. The Afghan veterans, the Iraq veterans, they all have parades. And in some ways, I envy these guys because of that, but that's one of the positives of the Vietnam War.
Right. And I'll tell you, as a veteran of the Afghanistan campaign myself, I appreciate exactly what John sponsored and what, not only what he did to ensure that Vietnam veterans are recognized for what they did, but also for paving the way for the rest of us. You know, you made it better for everyone that followed you, which is in itself something to say, I think.
And at this point, I would make an unsolicited plug. John has a new book, and I have read and have been involved in the writings and portrayal of the battle in Vietnam. But this book is a must read for anybody who has experienced Vietnam or didn't experience Vietnam, because the helicopter pilot is the Army's 911. Whenever we were in trouble, if we heard that rotor blade sound, we knew that help was on the way, or that our mail was on the way, or that our child was on the way. So John in my book is a hero, one of my favorite people in the world.
Is there a message that you both would like to send to fellow Vietnam veterans on this anniversary of the signing of this bill?
Well, I'd just like to say that, this, I think, highlights the solidarity that we're looking for in our society, that it puts it on the stage so that everybody knows this is the day for those of us who wore the uniform and served in Vietnam to be recognized for our service. And I think it's important. I'd also like to say, I think that Maryland was the very first. Later, the President of the United States did welcome home Vietnam Veterans Day for the whole United States, but I think we did it first. Now, I have another little story I love to tell. The guy that I served with in the Senate was in the Army at the same time I was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. I was in Vietnam flying helicopters in combat, and he was stationed on the Italian Riviera. So I'm not sure what the Army was doing on the Italian Riviera, but we used to joke about how far apart we were.
John, how do you think that your efforts in developing the legislation and your participation in the Hospice's Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day events has impacted you personally? Particularly, did those kind of inform your decision to go ahead and write a book about this?
Well, let me just say about the book. The book is really not something I wrote. It's something I lived. When I was in Vietnam, or when I went to Vietnam, I knew I wasn't going to write a lot of letters because I just don't like to write. So I took a tape recorder and I would talk in the tape recorder. And then when I filled up a tape, I would send them home to my mother, and my mother saved them. They were in a closet for 45 years. And then one day we were moving her to assisted living, and she said, "Why don't you take these tapes?" So I brought them back to Annapolis and put them back in my closet. And then I had a friend here in town who was assigned to the Marine Corps Historical Branch, and I mentioned I had these tapes, and he said, "Well, that's great. We have an audio history project, and this would be great." So I donated the tapes. They gave me back a digitized copy of the tapes, but more importantly, a transcription of the tapes. And then another friend of mine had a sister who writes, and I mentioned I had this transcription, and she said, "Well, I think my sister would like to see that." So I gave it to her, and she came back to me a couple weeks later and said, "There's a story here." And it, I think, really kind of approximates all of us that went to Vietnam. We started off pretty gung-ho, we're going to preserve democracy and a free world and motherhood and apple pie and all those things. And we came home pretty much cynical veterans. And so this thing, these tapes and the diary paint that picture pretty starkly.
Right. So in your book, you actually describe your experiences for that 13 months that you were there in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. And you get a real sense of the extreme highs and lows, the real stressful situations where you're, bringing troops in or extracting them out. But then the lows of just kind of hanging around the tent, trying to figure out what's going to go on next, and maybe sheer boredom in some cases. How did you personally cope with the disparity between the highs and the lows there?
You know, Bob, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, part of the time we spent in the officers club. And so I think whether you like it or not, alcohol played a role in our lives while we were there. But, you know, somebody asked me once, how did you go and fly every day, every day, every day? And I said, because that's what we had to do. That was our job. And we did our job.
Great. George, serving in combat is surely a life-changing experience, not only for the one who's in combat, but for families who are left behind too. How would you best describe the impact that your combat experience had on you, both in the short term and the long term?
Again, that's a difficult question for me, and on the back end of that, a painful, because as a rifle company commander, you're responsible for the lives of a number of people, and they look to you for good decisions. At the time, I was in my early 20s, fresh out of ROTC. So I didn't really have a grasp on what I was supposed to do. I mean, we were well trained, but not trained for the emotions of losing people. And in the battle that's depicted in a number of books, the Battle of the Ile Drang, I lost 17 young heroes who, no telling what they could have been or what their contributions could have been to this society. One of my radio operators was a medical student, and he left college to join the Army so that he could finish medical school. Well, unfortunately, I didn't bring him home. And so for a number of years, I struggled with if I coulda, woulda, shoulda. What could I have done to save more lives? And this kind of put me in a funk. One of the things that the legislation did for me is that it assured me that I wasn't alone out there. And the feelings that I had were the feelings of most of people of our generation. And so my message to guys is, don't be too proud to seek help. PTSD is serious, and there are available resources that you can use to help you get out of the jungles. And welcome home doesn't just mean that it's a nicety. It's a reach out for help, and it's a vehicle to help you solve the mental funk that you can get into if you don't get out of your jungle fatigues, don't take off those jungle boots, talk to people about mental health. And it's not a sign of weakness, it is a reality.
Right. I know, I think we're getting ready to experience the same sort of thing with the veterans that came back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And in totality, we need to make sure that the resources are there to help them. George, John, I'd ask you the same thing. How would you best describe the impact that your experience in that 13 months had on you, both in the short and long term?
It gave me some life experience that I would not have otherwise had. You know, George talked about saving lives and about our responsibility. Well, as an aircraft commander, I was responsible for the lives of anybody that happened to be on my helicopter. I went out on a medevac one day, and I called once I got overhead and asked them what the situation was. And they said, well, they'd been taking heavy automatic weapons fire. So now, and I'm 25, I have to make a decision. Do I risk my airplane and the lives of my 3 crewmen against the life of one 18-year-old Marine who was seriously wounded? Or do I call for gunships to support me so I could go down with the gun cover and it would help with, the hostile fire? Well, I opted for the guns, and it took about 20 minutes for them to detach from where they were and get to where I was. Well, they got there, covered me. I went down, I got this kid, and I'm headed back to the hospital. And he died in the back of my helicopter. Now, I've agonized over that even today, 50 some years later. If I'd gone down, could I have gotten him, and would the 20 minutes have made a difference? Or maybe if I'd have gone down, instead of 1, we would have had 5 dead. So, those questions, you learn about how to make decisions and how to live with them. And I think in the legislative process, it really helped me because I kept a clear head, and I know I'm going to make some decisions. I'm going to try to get all the information, and then I'm going to stick by it. And so one of the things I used to say to some of my colleagues, they get all emotional about an issue, and I'd say, hey, hold on. Are they shooting real bullets here? And they'd look at me and say, what? I'd say, well, if they're not shooting real bullets, then this is not a real problem, and we have time to sit down and deal with it in a very thoughtful way. So that was some of what came out of my experience.
Right.
And if I might jump in, there are, and I'm always a guy who the glass is half full as opposed to half empty. I was at a reunion once when I was lamenting the fact that I had lost this number of guys. And a young man came up to me and said, Captain, I am here because my father was in your unit and your action saved his life, and I'm here. And so it kind of, it didn't take away the cloud, but there was a silver lining somewhere, and this kid identified it for me. And John's legislation created a comfort zone for me. I am now comfortable talking about my experience, what Vietnam meant, what it meant to America, and what heroes like John Astle did by recognizing and making the rest of America aware that, as Joe Galloway once said, we may not have been the great generation, but we were the greatest of our generation.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, that's great. I thank you both very much for being here today and taking the time out of your schedules to talk with us. We mentioned the book. The name of the book is Jungle Combat. It's John Astle's story of his 13 months there. The author's name is Gemma Jablonski. You can find it online. I highly recommend that you get that book and read about what it was like for John during his 1 year, 13 months in Vietnam. And then on behalf of the Hospice of the Chesapeake, we wish to recognize and give thanks for all of those who served during the Vietnam War, including those who were wounded, gave their lives, or went missing in action. Please join me in a moment of silence as we give respect, admiration, and thanks to all the patriotic men and women who sacrificed so much in service to their nation. Thank you.